Bom pessoal, é isso mesmo que vocês estão vendo com seus próprios olhos. Hoje temos aqui uma figura mais do que ilustre, o Kuro do Ink Tank. Caso você esteja aí desatualizado da última meia década da fandom, o Kuro é o criador das séries como 5 Years Later and Beyond e também participa de debates na fandom e muito mais. E por isso saibam que é uma figura de enorme honra. Isso em vista, vamos entrevistá-lo numa conversa exclusiva onde ele revelará detalhes de sua vida, sua relação com Ben 10 e do universo de 5 Years Later. Kuro, obrigado aí novamente por aceitar essa entrevista conosco. E seguinte pessoal, as perguntas serão feitas pelo nosso colaborador Capeco, que se voluntariou para fazer a tradução entre o inglês e português, permitindo assim a entrevista. Eu vou falar em português, o Capeco vai passar para o inglês e o Kuro responderá em inglês. Então, tendo organizado aí todo o ambiente, vamos então para as perguntas. Seguindo aqui então para a pergunta de número 1, e bom, todos sabemos aí que uma das principais premissas do universo de 5 Years Later é unir as franquias de Ben 10 e Danny Phantom. Ao longo dos quadrinhos, também vimos personagens do universo de Invasor Zim e referências a outras franquias, como Mutant Rex, por exemplo. Dada a extensão de tantos crossovers, gostaria de saber o quão amplo é o multiverso de 5 Years Later. Ele abrange toda a ficção ou é restrita a universos de desenhos animados?
Yeah, so I feel like the 5YL universe definitely focuses primarily on Ben 10 and Danny Phantom, but it does offer up the chances for other worlds to intersect and cross over with each other. I think of it more like each central universe has its own multiverse. Like Ben has his own multiverse, Danny Phantom has its own multiverse, and if you think of it like a Venn diagram, the multiverses sort of overlap, allowing there to be a crossover there. Then of course Invader Zim would have a multiverse, Generator Rex would have a multiverse, and all of those collectively make the Omniverse. So in a way, yeah, I would say like the 5YL universe has pretty much everything when you consider multiversal travel, but it does primarily just focus on like those core animated shows.
Yeah, that's great to hear. So I'm sure we'll have lots of opportunities for future crossovers maybe, and we'll be touching that on another question. But passing on to question number 2.
Seguindo aqui então, vamos para a pergunta de número 2. É um fato que a série principal de 5 Years Later vai terminar na edição 14. Dado que os fãs estão longe de estarem saturados da franquia, você pretende aí continuar expandindo o universo com spin-off ou algo do tipo?
We have talked about what we're going to do when 5 Years Later is finished, and we do have some plans in the works that I don't want to spoil too much, but I do feel like some series like And Beyond that we already have going, that can definitely exist independently from 5YL. So after 5YL's over, I can see And Beyond going on its own journey and continuing as its own thing. And we have talked about smaller projects that can take place like within the 5YL multiverse, either like before, during, or after the main story that we might touch on. So I don't think we would ever do something like a sequel or any major next installment, but I can see us still messing around in the universe and doing commissions as well. We do a lot of artwork for fans, drawing their aliens or their own alternative Omnitrix user in their own multiverse. So, you know, there's still ways for us to keep 5YL going in some spirit. But once the main story is over, we're gonna cap it at that.
All right. I'm sure many fans will be glad to hear that there's going to be a continuation in some form or another of this universe, even if it isn't a huge sequel series of Danny Phantom and Ben 10 themselves, but in some shape or another there will be a continuation, so that's great to hear.
Então, próxima pergunta aqui de número 3, há um tópico que tem sido motivo de debate entre os membros da equipe de Ben 10, que é os chamados alienígenas fublons. O Danko Roleal diz que a maioria dos aliens não são completamente alienígenas e que eles têm uma pequena porcentagem do DNA do Ben para manter as memórias e a consciência do usuário. No entanto, quando confrontado com essa afirmação, o Derek diz que as opiniões do Duncan são apenas canônicas para o Ben 10 reboot. E o que você acha então dessa questão? Você acredita que a maioria das transformações são alienígenas parciais? E quanto ao universo de 5 Years Later, como que isso funciona lá?
I imagine there does have to be some significant form of Ben's DNA in these aliens, just because he needs to retain his consciousness and memories when he transforms. And there's also some crossover between his human form and his aliens. Like whenever he gets sick, his aliens also get sick. Or sometimes, but not every time, if he gets injured, or if one of his aliens injured and vice versa, they all share those injuries. So there has to be something that connects them all, and I imagine there's a core part of Ben's DNA that's within all of them. But when they say partial aliens, I don't think that means like these aliens aren't the fullest that they can be. I think the amount of Ben's DNA in that is inconsequential. It's not like saying because like Heat Blast has some of Ben's DNA in it, that means that Heat Blast isn't a full Pyronite. I don't think that's what they're saying. Almost like if any of you have seen Invincible, how Omni-Man says Mark's DNA, the Viltrumite DNA inside of him is so pure, he might as well be a full Viltrumite, even though he's half Viltrumite, half human. I imagine it's a very similar scenario.
Alright, so I have one question that wasn't planned, but I have made it according to your answer. So
sure,
it's like so you mean that it doesn't affect their power, but it's so small, percentage so small of human DNA that you could as well say they are full aliens. Is that it?
Yes.
A very small percentage. Okay. All right. Thanks for the answer.
No problem.
Going to question number 4.
Seguindo aqui então com a pergunta de número 4, quando se trata aí de alguns tópicos, tem algumas mudanças e retcons no universo de 5 Years Later. Talvez aí o principal seja os Mosianos serem alienígenas novamente. Além disso, você e o Ash desenharam alienígenas supremos fenomenais. Dado que esses designs não são considerados canônicos, você já considerou torná-los canônicos ou retconar o bem para ter a função evolutiva novamente?
Well, whenever we talk about the ultimates for the ones that O.R. Ash does for the drawing matrix, which I have to give him major props for. A lot of them completely come from his own artwork and ideas, so he deserves the glory for that. While they aren't canon in a sense that Ben can access them currently, because his 5YL Omnitrix doesn't have the evolution feature, I would say that if for some reason he ever did put the Ultimatrix back on again, or if Azimuth added an evolution feature, then we can expect ultimates like the ones O.R. Ash designed to show up. Because with ultimates, I feel like they can be generated in different ways through different devices. Like how Albedo's ultimates are different from Ben's in Omniverse. I don't think that's just because that's how they are in Omniverse. I think that Albedo really does just generate completely different beings. So it would stand to reason that if Ben put on a second or new version of the Ultimatrix, he would get different Ultimate Humongousaur or a different Ultimate Echo than he used to when he was 16.
All right, we'll get to Ultimates back again in a future question, but that's interesting to hear. Like many fans have different theories of why Albedo's Ultimates are different, if it's the art style of Omniverse, if it's a different kind of evolutionary process, and it's great to hear that you have set how it works in 5 years later. That is a different evolutionary process from a different Ultimatrix. I think it's an interesting theory. And going into question number 5.
Seguindo aqui agora para a pergunta de número 5, e essa é do meu amigo Celtron, que também é um grande fã de Ben 10 5 Years Later. É afirmado no capítulo 7 que a ectoenergia é a única força ilimitada no universo de 5 Years Later, e é até dito que poderia derrubar um sapien celestial, dado que no universo principal de Ben 10 a magia é dita não ter regras, e que o Derek J. White disse que há um feitiço que poderia cancelar a onipotência de um sapien celestial. Então aí eu gostaria de saber se a magia foi nerfada no multiverso de 5 Years Later e onde ela fica na hierarquia de poderes.
I see magic a little differently than how I think Derek saw it when answering this question. I see magic as a practice or a method or tool that you can learn to control energy. I don't think magic itself is a specific type of energy source. Like the energies in the universe, your natural your ki or your chakra or life energy, whatever you call it, that's just the natural energy in the universe, and magic is a specific way that people taught themselves to manipulate it. And there's many different ways to manipulate it. Like some, like Feedback and Chromastone, they absorb and redirect energy, whereas Gwen would cast a spell to manipulate that energy. Even in 5YL, what Eon does, and all of the Cronians on their home planet. In a way, you can consider that magic, where it's just their own method of manipulating that energy. So to say magic is nerfed or works differently, I think if you just learn how to control the energies that magic uses in different ways, eventually you can find yourself climbing higher and higher tiers of power. Now, when it comes to ecto energy, it doesn't really fit in a scale of power because it's not supposed to exist. It's like if a video game programmer was trying to create a video game with rules of how a character runs and what powers it has. Ecto energy is a glitch in the code. It, for some reason, allows the character to break the rules and do things that the game wasn't supposed to do. So regardless of the natural hierarchy of power, whereas how strong something is or how much it has control over time and reality, ecto energy is like a hack that can jury-rig its way through and break those rules. So I wouldn't say magic is nerfed, because you could still learn, you could even use magic to learn how to manipulate ecto energy, because magic is just the practice of manipulating energy. So I would say they're two different things.
All right. Let me just add one more quick question to this.
Sure.
So, is it in some way going back to how Ultimate Alien Force treated magic? Like, it's not its own thing, but it's a method to control the natural energy, the scientific natural energy of the universe, but it's an esoteric, an arcane method of manipulating that energy. Is it that way?
Yeah, it's very similar to that, because you can teach yourself, anybody can teach themselves magic. Some characters have a better, have it easier to control. Like if you're Gwen, if you're an Anodite, it just comes more naturally to you because you have that within you. Whereas Charmcaster had to teach herself and learn the hard way and use books and practice and train. But it's two different ways to do the same thing.
All right. Thank you. And question number 6.
Em seguida aqui então vamos com a pergunta de número 6. Em 5 Years Later, os osmosianos voltaram a ser alienígenas. Dito isso, mutantes como Cooper são referidos novamente pela palavra mutante. Existem outros personagens, no entanto, que não se encaixam nem como osmosianos nem como mutantes, e ainda têm poderes interessantes. Quando se trata do Doutor Animal, a sua página na Wiki diz que seus poderes de manipulação animal não vêm de seu equipamento, mas vêm do próprio animal. E como isso funciona? É como na continuidade oficial, em que a manipulação animal é uma técnica que o animal obteve do Clancy através de treinamento, ou tem algo a mais aí nesse Doutor Animal?
I think originally he did have to use his technology, like the transmogrifier, to do it, but then since learning it from Clancy and working with the -10, it became a power. In Omniverse, it does seem like he's a little more dependent on technology again. Like in It Was Them and TGIS, all they had to do was break his antenna and he lost his control. But you'll notice those antennas are embedded into his actual brain. So I think it's a power that he has now, and it's supernatural. It's something he learned to do, but the technology helps him perfect it. Whereas in 5 Years Later, he still has that ability, but he mostly uses it now to puppet his numerous alien and animal limbs that he stitches onto himself in order to have certain abilities and help him build things and navigate his laboratory a little better.
Pergunta então de número 7. Em Ben 10 existem muitas fontes de informações canônicas. Quando se trata de declarações da equipe, do próprio show, informações de merchandise e outras mídias, como jogos e quadrinhos, como você ordena a hierarquia de canone para a franquia?
The show definitely comes first. If something happens in the show, then whether it's a good, a bad idea, whatever it is, it has to be canon. If we were going to change something, we try to come up with a reason as to why it's changed. For example, when we wanted to go back to Osmosians being aliens, our reason for that is that Cervantes made up his whole story, rather than just pretending that never happened. So we try not to change the show too much because we treat that as canon. As when it comes to merch info, crew statements, medias, that I feel like we're a little more flexible with, Because some things we can just ignore, mostly because if it doesn't even come up in the show, then it doesn't really interfere with anything. But we do try to take a lot of those statements as influence anyways. For example, years ago, Butch Hartman came up with this idea to give Danny the Phantom Flame power, and that wasn't in the show at all. But we liked the idea, so in 5YL, Danny now has that power. So that's an example of taking something outside of a show and making it canon. However, if we didn't like that power, we could just ignore it. And as long as you watch the show, it doesn't matter.
All right. That's a very interesting point of view, because some fans really hang onto the cruel statements. But as you said, for others, the show is the main source of canon. So that's great to hear, and you made a lot of things clear. Going into the next question.
Seguindo aqui então com a pergunta de número 8, como você se tornou fã de Ben 10 e Danny Phantom? E como começou isso na sua infância? Explica isso pra gente.
So, I became a Danny Phantom fan first, just because the show is older. It came out in 2004, and Ben 10, its first episode was at the end of 2005, but generally, I think you could say it started in 2006. And I followed Danny Phantom from the first episode. I think it was the first action cartoon that I really got into. It really clicked with me. I was obsessed with his costume and his powers and his hair. He was so cool to me. And then when Ben 10 started coming out, I actually didn't get hooked on it at first. It seemed a little bit too creepy. Mostly just because it was not something that I typically watched a lot. I didn't avoid it, I just didn't try to get into it. Well, one day I was just flipping through the channels and I saw the episode A Small Problem, the one where he gets stuck as gray matter the whole episode, and I found it fascinating. So I started watching it. And then I believe by the time they got to the season 2 finale, Back with a Vengeance, where Vilgax teams up with Kevin, they had a marathon of all of the episodes, and I watched that in order to catch up with the show. And then ever since then, starting with season 3 episode 1 of Classic, I watched them as they came out. So I had a late start to Ben 10, but it stuck with me pretty hard, and I watched it all the way through. Whereas Danny Phantom, I watched it since it started up until its end.
I totally get what you're saying. Like, Ben 10, the original series, as much as it is more joyful, maybe, than Ultimate Alien Force, at the same time, there's a few scenes in which the scenes are kind of empty, and it is a little liminal at times. Like, it can really creep you out, especially in episodes such as the introduction of Wildvine. There are a few episodes in which things are really creepy. So, thank you for your answer.
Seguindo aqui então com a pergunta de número 9, recentemente foi revelado em uma entrevista do Ink Tank que Titã Simbiônico foi planejado para ser do mesmo universo que Ben 10. Além disso, através do Derek J. White, Ben 10 Omniverse compartilha muitas conexões como Transformers Animated. Então quais outras franquias podemos esperar serem mencionadas ou aparecerem no futuro do universo de 5 Years Later?
Well, we have a lot of fun with the multiverse concept, so we try to stick as much stuff in there as we can without interfering with the story, because I'm a very story and character driven writer, and as much as I love like dozens upon dozens of animated shows, I felt like if I made the main crossover too big, it would be hard to follow and start pushing people away the more they're unfamiliar with the characters. Like a lot of readers or watchers of 5YL only know Ben 10 and not Danny Phantom. So I have to write the Danny Phantom stuff in a way that you can still understand it without seeing the show, and same vice versa. If you only know Danny Phantom, I have to catch you up with everything on Ben 10 first. And the more shows I add, the more there's an opportunity for you to be lost. So I try to just focus on the story of Ben and Danny, and I would say Invader Zim has the strongest presence after those, so he's like the third tier. And everything else, we're just weaving in either as canon parts of the story, like we've hinted towards Rex a lot with the nanites. In episode 7, he gets name dropped in episode 9, and you see him in a flashback. And we also make a lot of like cameo jokes and everything. like in the Ledger Domain episode of And Beyond, when they're talking about all the life energies in chakra, you see like a soul from Soul Eater, a Dragon Ball, a Rasengan from Naruto. So we try to reference a lot of stuff to celebrate the multiverse, but we try not to do it so much where it makes people lost and feel like they don't understand what's happening anymore.
Makes sense to me. I mean, even if fans really like to see many characters from different franchises, at the same time, it's a narrative problem. When you have so many different characters from different universes, and they all interact with each other, you may get lost quite rapidly. So thank you for that.
10ª pergunta agora. O Matt Wayne afirmou no passado que é possível para os Cryptids estarem no Omnitrix, e como isso funcionaria em 5 Years Later, como a franquia Sábados Secretos é integrada no universo de 5 Years Later.
I would say it's possible, but I don't know if Azimuth collected the DNA samples, but as long as you think about the 3 major rules of what makes an Omnitrix alien is it intelligent? Is the DNA different enough from the main host to count as a separate being? And does it have some form of DNA? And I think cryptids have, well, most cryptids have all 3. They have different DNA, they're different from the host, and they're intelligent enough. So I can certainly see cryptids being possible Omnitrix transformations, but it would be up to either Ben or Azimuth to go collect them.
Pergunta agora de número 11. Na versão animada de 5 Years Later, há uma cena em que o Ben passa por uma longa lista de modos do Omnitrix. Existem características interessantes no Omnitrix de 5 Years Later que você poderia nos mencionar?
So a lot of those, I just wanted to fill up the list to make it seem full, but I did try to write things where if people did ask me what they were, I would have some type of answer, but I know the tricky part is because the Omnitrix can transform you into so many different things that already have powers and abilities. What can the Omnitrix do itself that's special that Alien can't, or at least it's more interesting for the Omnitrix to do it? So we have a mode, there's like a factory mode where like it opens up the shell for people to operate easy on it, like if Blue Kitchen Driba have to add something to it. There's a stealth mode where the Omnitrix turns invisible, so if Ben ever had to go undercover or something, the Omnitrix will camouflage itself, so he could be like, I'm not Ben, look, no Omnitrix. It can change its skin a lot, like look like the classic Omnitrix or the Alien Force 1 or any of those. There's one that, it's like a defensive mode, where almost like the big energy ball, like from Kevin 11 or Secret of the Omnitrix, where it creates a pulse blast automatically to protect Ben, or even like a force field. Then there's like a whole computer on there where he can do video calls. He could probably go on the internet, check emails and stuff, record videos. There's got to be a camera in there. And then my favorite feature is the uniform mode, which we put into the comic, which sort of explains why Ben 10,000 has a specific outfit. It's supposed to lead towards that, but it's also supposed to be if an alien turned into a human, because the Omnitrix always gives like aliens clothing that's appropriate to their culture, what kind of outfit would the Omnitrix try to supply a human if they were a transformation? So that's where that idea came from.
Pergunta agora de número 12. No capítulo 8 de 5 Years Later, é revelado que o processo evolutivo do Ultimatrix é geralmente aleatório. Isso significa que não há uma única versão suprema de cada alienígena? Se for o caso, como isso funciona?
Yeah, so it is very similar to what I said earlier. If I were to try to come up with an example, if you had like a bunch of acorns and they all grow into the trees, right? But if you planted each acorn, each tree would grow differently. It's not like you would get the exact same tree with the exact same branches and the exact same number of leaves on every tree. And that's how I imagine the old evolutionary feature works with the DNA. Every time it evolves the alien DNA, there's no one specific way that it will evolve. It evolves differently every time, so you never really know what you're gonna get.
Even if it's the same Ultimatrix on the same user, it will always evolve differently. Is that how it works?
If it's the same Ultimatrix with the same user, I think it would generate it once and then keep that consistent form. But if he were to use a different device, or if the Ultimatrix rebooted, then it would recreate the ultimate. So it would generate it once and then have that transformation, but it could reset and then you would get a new ultimate.
Right, that makes it much more clear. Thank you.
Vamos então agora para a pergunta de número 13. Em um vídeo recente, você mostrou como a Wiki agora considera o manto do fantasmático ser um protetor como um erro. No entanto, a Wiki de 5 Years Later diz que o fantasmático tem uma pele removível que o protege. Isso tá correto? Se sim, tem mais diferenças entre como os alienígenas funcionam na continuidade principal e em 5 Years Later que você gostaria de mencionar?
Yeah, so there's some things in 5 Years Later that we try to make as canon to Ben 10 as we could, but when the information changes over the years, but it's already in 5YL, we can't go back and fix it. Like some non-alien examples are like Cooper's last name being Daniels. In 5YL, we're still having him Cooper Daniels, even though that's not on the wiki. Same with calling full stop a Nalgean. We're just gonna keep it because that's how we've been doing it and there's no sense changing it now. And we did change some alien powers. Again, we try not to change the canon too much, but we do in small ways, like Toe Pick. In the show, he just has a very scary face and it terrifies people. But in 5YL, the gas that you see come out of his mask in the show, we made it so that gas is a psychotic hallucinogen, so you see your worst fear. So whatever you're most afraid of in life, that's what Toe Pick's fear gas makes you see. We changed blocks a little bit to where he shoots out these little hexagon shaped things and he can shape and move them around telepathically. It was a little bit inspired by how he works in the first Omniverse game, when you hold his power stance and he has all of the Legos flying around him in a 360 rotation. I tried to make it like that. But for the most part, yeah, I feel like we keep the aliens very similar to how they work in the canon.
Makes sense to me. Thank you.
Seguindo a nossa lista então, vamos para a 14ª. E bom, tem um personagem no quadrinho que é apenas mencionado e nunca aparece em nenhuma edição, o Dr. Logic. Você pode falar mais sobre esse personagem em si?
So, originally when I came up with Dr. Logic, it was just for that one line where he's name dropped, because I wanted to make it seem like Ben had a whole arsenal of villains he went up against in between the 5 years. I didn't want it to just be the same people we've known the whole time, because in 5 more years, of course, he's gonna run into more villains. And I was just trying to think of like an interesting name you would hear, so I thought Dr. Logic, that sounds neat. But I did start coming up with a story for that character, and I actually really love what I came up with, but it's to the point where I feel like if I ever wanted to tell this story, I would want to do it in a similar way to 5 Years Later. Maybe not a motion comic, but I want to find the right way to tell that story. So I don't want to spoil too much about him, but I do want to say I did come up with a story for Ben. It would take place when he's about 18 years old, and he gets master control for the first time. He's trying to learn to be a hero. And Dr. Logic is kind of inspired by myself in a way when I record the Ben 10 breakdowns I do on the channel, where I'm just like, well, why doesn't Ben just do this? Or why doesn't he do that? So Dr. Logic is a villain that sees the perfect way for Ben to use the Omnitrix and tries to challenge him and mold him into what he thinks is the superior hero. But I don't want to say anything else unless I ever get to tell the story. If 10 years go by and I never tell this story, I'll just type it out and put it online. But for now, I want to see if there's a way I can tell this story without ruining it.
That's very good to hear. So there is yet another door that might open for us in the future.
Seguimos aqui então com a pergunta de número 15. Embora tenha sido dito antes que o Omnitrix pode aceitar o DNA de Pokémon, o Derek acredita que o Omnitrix só pode ter DNA de predadores. Isso é verdade para o universo de 5 Years Later, ou o Omnitrix pode aceitar DNA de qualquer espécie não sapiente?
I would say any non-sapient species, because I don't know how the Nemetrix would be able to tell what a predator specifically would be, because a predator is more of a label about what your position is in your ecosystem. There's nothing that, like, in your DNA you can tell it's a predator. There are some things on Earth you can, like, if your eyes grow forward, you're more of a predator, but if your eyes grow on each side like a rabbit or a lizard, you're more likely to be prey. But in the grand scheme of things, you know, the rabbit and lizard hunt bugs and other things. So they, in that perspective, they're predators. Or we could be predators because, you know, we hunt things. We hunt wolves or other animals. So I think when you really try to define what makes a predator, it's so vague. I wouldn't say there's a type of DNA. I don't think there's a way your DNA signifies if you're a predator or not. And because of that, I would say the Omnitrix can obtain a lot more things that you wouldn't expect to be a predator.
Seguimos aqui então, rapaziada, com a pergunta de número 16. Você disse aí no passado que uma das razões por trás da criação dos quadrinhos de 5 Years Later foi porque você queria que mais fãs de Ben 10 se tornassem fãs de Danny Phantom. Como você visualiza o efeito que teve em ambas as fandoms? Você vê isso como revolucionário ou nem tanto?
I would say trying to get more Ben 10 fans to become Danny Phantom fans is how it is now. But when it first started, it was actually the opposite. It was around 2016 or 2017. Danny Phantom was starting to get another wave of popularity. It was helped out a lot by the Go Ghost Again hashtag, which was started by Holly Payne. Then Butch Hartman started uploading on YouTube, which got it more. So it seemed like Danny Phantom was getting really big. And I felt like if we can really push that, there's a strong chance that the show can get a revival, because people have been campaigning for Danny Phantom to continue for years now. And I wanted to be a part of that. I wanted to see if there was something I can do to make that happen. And I figured if I made a really interesting webcomic, a Danny Phantom webcomic, and people really liked it and it got popular, it would show Nickelodeon that there's still fans out there. Because the biggest thing is there's nothing new. There hasn't been a new episode or movie in well over a decade. So I was like, I wanted to try to make something that would get people interested. And because I'm a huge Ben 10 fan, and at the time, Ben 10 didn't have nearly as big of a presence online as it does now. It wasn't really talked about. There were no notable Ben 10 YouTubers. I was like, if I throw Ben 10 in there, maybe I can try to get some popularity for him as well. And I can try to get all of these massive Danny Phantom fans to check out Ben 10, so I'd have more people to talk about it with. And then I didn't see this coming, but the comic became much, much more popular with Ben 10. I think that was also in part of my Superman and Goku versus Ben 10 video. That sort of jump-started people getting interested in Ben 10 again, and then they checked out the comic. And now there's significantly more fans of Ben 10 that read the comic and watch 5YL than Danny Phantom. And over the years, Ben 10 has gotten more and more and more popular, especially with the reboot and all of the YouTubers now. We got Stan Hanrahan, Xander Flicks. You guys have your community as well, which is great to hear. Which I've seen some of your videos, by the way, like a whole bunch of different international Ben 10 videos. I have to watch them with subtitles, but it's cool to see the whole world making more Ben 10 videos. But in that turn, there's a lot less Danny Phantom fans now. So now I'm trying to do the opposite and get Ben 10 fans to check out Danny Phantom, and I'm just trying to manage a balance between building both fandoms as to the best of my abilities, and I'm trying to use 5YL to make that happen.
Yeah, I'm sure there are lots of more Ben 10 fans nowadays.
Yes.
And the community has literally grown a lot over the years. And some of this is due to you. So thanks once again for all of your work, your effort. Thanks, Kuro.
Seguimos aqui então com a pergunta de número 17. Em Omniverse, os alienígenas do Omnitrix tinham ou não roupas baseadas na cultura dos aliens? Considerando que o Enormossauro está nu e o Chama tem calças, isso é uma mudança em como o Omnitrix funciona?
Yeah, I would say the Omnitrix is a lot more customizable now with how it adds or subtracts clothes. Ben has even figured out how to give aliens certain armor or abilities that they might need. For example, Wild Mutt, the Omnitrix didn't give him the saddle or the horn. That was a customized thing that Ben gave, because throughout the series, you'll notice sometimes people ride Wild Mutt like a horse. So I figured as Ben gets older and the smarter he gets with manipulating the Omnitrix, he programmed it to give Wild Mutt a saddle and give it a horn to make him have an easier time carrying people and fighting in battles. Or with 1010, his Sodoragan form, I think that's how you pronounce it. He made sure it had a lot of the same weapons that he's seen 6, 6, and 7 have. So Ben customizes his alien forms a lot more with their tools and armor than what the Omnitrix used to just randomly give.
Seguindo aqui agora com a pergunta de número 18, em um vídeo recente você disse que estava refletindo sobre talvez não fazer os últimos 2 capítulos como quadrinhos, mas diretamente como vídeos animados. Você já tomou essa decisão ou ainda não?
I haven't, because it's still such a big choice to make, because 5YL, it started as a comic, and I feel like that's what helps make it easier for people to access. It's a lot easier to read a comic than watch a video. And plus, since I put it on Webtoon, it started getting really popular on there. So it would be disappointing to see it never get a comic resolution. But at the same time, I stand by the fact that it would be easier to not make the comic, because I have so many ideas and animation tricks and special ways I want to present the story that I don't think is going to be possible if I did it as a comic. So I am leaning towards not doing the comic, but I still feel like there's a chance I'll do it anyways, just to make sure both versions of the story have a conclusion. But it's still too difficult of a choice to make for now.
There are surely pros and cons for both sides. I mean, I do have all of the 12 chapters downloaded on my external hard drive. As you know, we're all fans here. But I see your point, the point you're trying to make. So it might take some time to make the comic version. Now that you're so invested on the animated version. So we all get your point, and I'm sure you make the right decision when it gets to the time.
Thank you.
So, all right. Last 2 questions.
Seguindo aqui para a penúltima pergunta, número 19. E bom, você explicou a ectoenergia, mas como funciona a omnienergia em Ben 10 5 Years Later?
So that's always been a question I've had for the show proper, because they were always very vague about it. Because it's interesting when you think about the fact that the Omnitrix can run out of power, yet when he has master control, it can keep him as an alien for an infinite amount of time. It doesn't seem to ever run out of power. So I imagine that the out of power or the limited transformations are all just fail-safes, where the Omnitrix isn't really running out of power, it's just cutting Ben off. Because in order for the way the Omnitrix to work the way it does, I feel like Omni energy has to either not just be not infinite, but self-replicating. Like, it can be its own power source. Because you also have to think about the Omnitrix has survived everything its aliens have been through as well. Because the Omnitrix seems to be practically indestructible in certain times. Like when Ben is Alien X and he's fighting the Galactic Gladiator, not only is Alien X taking all of those hits and surviving all of those attacks, the Omnitrix is as well. And it probably needs an incredible amount of energy to power itself to take those hits too. So Omni energy is like a self-replicating energy source for the Omnitrix that I think Azimuth discovered, and that's what makes it so valuable, because there's many pieces of technology that can transform you in Ben 10.
Right. Makes sense to me. It's a really complete answer. I mean, the series has been vague about Omni energy, and we haven't had lots of info about it. So I think your answer is the best way we can put it without going against the canon. So thank you.
Thank you.
Last question.
Então agora, para finalizar aqui o nosso vídeo, vamos para a pergunta de número 20. Você vê a rápida adaptabilidade como um poder dos humanos em geral ou apenas do próprio Ben?
I think humans, because anything Ben can do, the peak version, or like the strongest or most capable human should be able to do it as well. I've actually been thinking about what would an alien see a human's power to be, and because we can actually do a lot of very impressive things. Like, we do have a low level of regeneration. We can't reform limbs, but if you cut me, eventually my skin is going to heal itself, and there's probably aliens out there that can't even do that. Or the fact that we have 10 fingers and we can build tools and everything, compared to an alien like Terraspin, who they do have fingers, but because they got these big floppy like fins, it must be a lot harder for them to build stuff. Or our small size. You know, if a Vaxasaurian is trying to investigate a smaller area. If you turn into a human, you'd be able to fit, and you'd have our hands and our sight. So I think there's a lot of value in what we can do that we don't see because it's normal for ourselves. And we might not even consider it a power. Like Arborian Pelorotas probably don't consider rolling into a ball a superpower, but Ben does when he becomes Cannonbolt and bounces around and knocks things around. So it's really interesting to think about all the things humans can do and what we're capable of, and how that could be valuable if an alien turned into one of us.
Well, that's a very interesting point of view. I mean, like you said, we usually don't see what we do as powers because we are so used to it. But at the same time, there are lots of things that some aliens on the Omnitrix can do that we probably can. Like the example you gave from Terraspin.
Yes.
So, thanks for answering all of these questions, Kuro. We'd like to once again express how happy we are that you accepted this interview with us. We're all huge fans here. The community has a huge appreciation for all the work you've done for us for all of these years. So thank you. That's all I can say. And the answers were all very insightful. So there's that as well. Thank you.
It's my pleasure, and thank you for having me on. I understand there's a lot of growing Ben 10 communities all over the world, so I'm happy to try to be a part of it in some way. And thank you guys for taking the time to translate these questions into English so that I can answer them for you. And yeah, no, it's been fun. These were really good questions. I had a good time coming up with answers and sharing my thoughts.
Thank you, Kuro.
Bom, rapaziada, então vamos finalizando nossa entrevista por aqui. Espero que vocês tenham gostado. Kuro, obrigado aí por ter aceito esse convite para participar aqui do meu canal. Bom, rapaziada, então é isso. Muito obrigado aí para quem ficou até o fim dessa entrevista. Tamo junto e fui!